Alright, this video is a little bit different than usual. This video is a snippet from the podcast, and I think going into the last saga, which is the name of the podcast, it's important to check where Luffy is at. Before we went into the time skip, this was an important note. I think in general, the big question at the end of any major event like this is Luffy ready for what is ahead? And I think because of what we saw in Onigashima and the amounts of buffs that Luffy has acquired because of his efforts, we kind of get the feeling that there aren't many threats left for Luffy. More so that this is the ceiling of power and it's not that much higher. But now at 10:55 we get a glimpse of what might come next, and Shanks really had all of us shook in response. That being said, I think it might be a little weird to say, but I think based on chapter 10:55, Luffy is not yet ready for what lies ahead. I think Luffy is going to have to hone himself a lot more before he can tackle on the next villains, and I honestly can't wait for it. So by now you're probably wondering why I'm saying all of this. So let's just jump straight into the snippet from the podcast. If you're new to my channel, the way I view the world is by making connections. So let me connect you to my vision, the Par vision. So now we get to the last page of the chapter. We see the party, but then we see Sanji, Luffy, Zoro, and Jinbei here watching the fight the whole time. They're proud of Momo and also impressed by the Conqueror's haki, but they were essentially watching Momo and the Scabbards box with an admiral. And yet again, we get to an understanding that the way the Straw Hats treat admirals, Ryokugus specifically, is so different than ever before. Ever since Aokiji, the fear of an admiral was instilled on them. Then when Kizaru was about to no-diff the entire crew, that was another pain point. Then when Akainu rained down hell on Marineford and killed Ace while Luffy was powerless, that was another source of PTSD. Each time Luffy was shown that in the face of an admiral, he was powerless to protect those he cared about every time. Yet here we are at chapter 10:55, and Luffy is casually watching an admiral fight his fodder friends and Yamato, and those fodder friends are not letting Yamato participate, so it just shows how comfortable Luffy feels he can be. Is this because they sense Aramaki through observation haki and understand that he isn't much of a threat anymore compared to what an admiral title used to hold to us? Something interesting about the scene that I'm confused about though is where is Kid in this chapter? He should be able to sense Ryokugu too, and maybe he senses Shanks, maybe that's why he's not here. But also Usopp isn't here. Maybe he can't sense the threat outside of Wano. And Law could be here, but he gets a pass since he's flirting with Robin on their history date. But from everything we can grasp is that Luffy has grown exponentially since the time skip to be able to smile like this in the face of an admiral bearing down on his head. But I think Luffy is not as strong as what we might think. We have a new power ceiling given to us from Shanks, and I think we have to ask ourselves, how close to that ceiling is Luffy? And though he has Nika's fruit and now has toppled Kaido with a fist that could arguably destroy an island that was coated in lightning and Rio, I think still Shanks is that far ahead of Luffy. I think Luffy will one day be able to do what Shanks is doing here, but we're not close to that yet. Luffy has just learned Conqueror's coding, but this display from Shanks is still something new to him. The reason I say that Luffy is far behind isn't because of what we saw out of the fight with Kaido or what Shanks did here, it's more so what Shanks said. So to repeat what he said, it was, "Now I'm not accusing you of fighting dirty, Navy man, but when the new shoots that just changed pirating history are exhausted from their feet, don't you think what you're doing is a bit much? Are you that afraid of the new era?" See, in TCB, they translated that part about new shoots as saplings. Both are pretty comparable in meaning. I asked Artur, Library of Ohara, what the Japanese kanji directly translates to, and he informed me that it was directly saying that Luffy is a new green leaf, which I really love that wording. And the conversation and reason I asked is because of a beautiful parallel I saw in chapter 511. But essentially Shanks is saying they are a fresh new plant that has still yet to mature. And the wording is so powerful in this chapter with the forest fruit or woodsman fruit, where we see that Ryokugu goes into a sapling form with new green leaves. So it feels like this is a progress report for Luffy that is yet to become a full-fledged tree or plant and is still budding and growing, and Shanks is the equivalent of a jewel tree atom. I don't know how much of a gap there is, but I trust Shanks in this assessment. I have no reason not to. But the reason why this felt like a progress report was because this paralleled nearly directly with Rayleigh in chapter 511. This was on Sabaody when Rayleigh saved Zoro from Kizaru's light kick. So to paint some of the parallels before the dialogue, we have a major event where the Straw Hats are coming out of, then we have an admiral responding to the situation and trying to capture them, then we have a Roger pirate stopping the admiral through their own means, and now let's get into the dialogue parallel as well. So Rayleigh says here to Kizaru, don't pick the buds before they sprout. Their era is only just beginning. And so Kizaru's line before reminds me of what Shanks started out saying, but let's focus on what the Roger pirates are saying. Rayleigh says the pre-time skip Straw Hats on Sabaody were just buds that haven't even sprouted yet, which I think is accurate, and we saw 100,000 reasons why that's the case, that Luffy was an ant in the storm of Marineford that made an impact through sheer willpower, but truthfully he did not stack up there. And now we fast forward to chapter 1055, and we get the update that while the Straw Hats have grown, they have sprouted now, and they're still just saplings, new shoots, or fresh new green leaves. They're much like this plant that Ryokugu turned into in this chapter, which makes me feel like the power gap is still very high between Luffy and the end stage that we're expecting, and Shanks might be our first glimpse at that end stage. This is why my elemental haki theories feel so important. The fact that my extensions of Conqueror's haki came to fruition, most of the responses I get are, there's not enough time for all of these new powers. But I think this is literally the introduction to it all. This is our first step into the levels of powers our main characters are going to have to confront moving forward in the story and as we head into the last saga. I think this is the exact setup for what I've been harping on, in that I think the last saga of One Piece is going to have a lot to do with nature and natural forces, and I think it's fitting that Oda has set up a progress report where I think chapter 1 was Shanks planting the seed. On Sabaody, the buds were on the precipice of sprouting, and now finally they have. Shanks says that they're new green leaves, but by the end of the story, our main characters and primarily Luffy will become a literal force of nature, or a big strong tree that can weather the storms that the world throws at him. I have to say it, chapter 1054 and on has been such incredible setup for this last saga, and I'm so excited to continue to read this story. Chapter 1055 really hit home with my Godfather Shanks theory, and I can't tell you enough how excited I am to share my Void Sentry theory and hopefully the Pluton theory. If you liked what you heard here today, definitely check out my Last Saga podcast. The full episode is live right now. I'll be doing a chapter analysis and reaction every week and posting them up as podcasts. Usually they'll be up by Fridays, but this past week and the coming week are incredibly busy for me. So thank you for understanding and looking forward to seeing you next time. And so, like always, thank you for connecting with me, and I'm looking forward to connecting with you all on the next part Vision.